Thank you. I am John Harris, that's John Domokos. It's sort of 50-50, our series, in the way that we work, although John kind of sees to the video element a bit more than I do, and I am the performing monkey. He tells me what to do, by and large. As you've just heard, Anywhere But Westminster goes all around the country. There you go, he's telling me already. Am I going all the way over here? Give me my notes, for God's sake. Only rather than asking people whether they give away their last roll or what they do in a doctor's waiting room, we find out how poor they are and the extent of their racism. That's basically what we do. Fire away.
Well, I was talk about politics, first of all. We're political reporters. Politics is a bubble, right? We all know that. And politicians live a sort of out-of-touch lives in their own bubble. Have we got a presentation? Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah. Bubble. Yeah, politicians are an arrogant, out-of-touch elite, right? This is kind of widely known now and accepted. Out of touch with ordinary people's lives.
It struck us in the course of making this series, our work as journalists generally, there might be a strong argument for saying that politicians, by and large, are not like that. Politicians have constituencies they go back to once a week. If you start a conversation with a politician of any political stripe, with the possible exception of UKIP, about housing, say, or life on benefits, or the job market, they'll tend to know quite a lot about it. I wonder increasingly whether the media might be the bigger problem, in the sense of being stuck in a bubble. This is a room full of media people. It might be worth asking yourself when, in the last couple of weeks, you've been more than 10 or 15 miles outside London. I do, but I get paid for it, so maybe it's slightly different. But I think there's a case to answer on the media's part, which then brings us into the case for doing journalism in a slightly different way.
So this is what the old sort of political journalism looks like. I say old, but it's kind of still done like this on the sort of main news outlets. A big sort of tented media village camped outside Westminster. Men and women in suits looking very authoritative come down and sort of tell us from on high what is going on inside. And
the most sort of interesting it gets, or the most creative it gets, is someone with a boom microphone running down a back street near Westminster shouting, "Mr. So-and-so, are you going to resign?" And equally, this style of journalism, which is still absolutely ubiquitous, is very fixated on polling, to the extent that the last general election in 2015, the reporting of that general election far too often centred around polls. That's kind of all it had to say. That's polls, P-O-L-L-S, not P-O-L-E-S, who are much more in the news. I personally have stopped watching current affairs television, by and large. And that's no joke. I only watch it sort of by accident. It's partly because I'm a stereotypical 40-something man, and I drink craft beer and watch HBO dramas. But it's also because I don't think it knows what on earth is going on, and that's reflected in the way that it does things.
And it's been rather found out recently, over recent years. These are sort of 6 stories that the media in general has been slow or completely in the wrong place on.
So it didn't see UKIP coming. UKIP may well have reached peak UKIP and may now be falling apart, but for the entirety of its rise to prominence, and let's be honest, its success in playing such a big role in the result of the referendum, every week I'd be told by a political journalist of one kind or another that UKIP was all over. That turned out not to be true. In Scotland, the reporting of all the noise around the referendum of 2014 tended to be focused on what George Osborne had said that day, or Ed Balls had said that day, or Alex Salmond had said that day. It didn't realise what was going on out in Scotland itself, in the country, which was a huge process of political ferment, which then resulted in the result being much closer than most political journalists expected. 2015, everyone...
And it didn't realise what was going to happen after the referendum either.
Yeah, or that it would... Yeah, the other thing, it would all go away once the result was called. 2015, most political journalists thought Ed Miliband was in with a shout. Ed Miliband certainly did. We knew that wasn't the case because we went to Nuneaton. And we've never been back. Jeremy Corbyn, similarly, everybody thought he was the kind of joke left-wing candidate, and then suddenly, midsummer, when it looked like he was going to win, they realised they had all been wrong, and he was going to be a shining success in every way and look like a potential prime minister, which is, of course, what has happened. Brexit, soon. Similarly, we were told that there was a great sort of shared impression on the part of the commentariat, news journalists and politicians, that it was absolutely inevitable that Remain would win. And Trump, in both the American and British media, was always seen as a kind of joke candidate outside of the clips. I'm sure you've seen them all over YouTube, of people saying there's no way that he's going to win, and the odd voice saying, no, I think he might, and getting laughed at. And then look what happened.
before we get to that, I'm going to take us back into the foggy mists of time about 7 years ago when our series was born. And it was born out of covering Party Conference. Has anyone here had the dubious pleasure of being to a party conference before?
They're absurd occasions. You're hungover all the time, there's no natural light, and you keep seeing George Osborne. That's not my definition of heaven, personally. But we got dispatched to make videos at quite a rate. We used to make 3 videos at each party conference, 9 videos. Even about the Liberal Democrats. There aren't 3 videos in the Liberal Democrats. There's not even one. Anyway, in the course of doing this, we came to the conclusion that how we covered them should be different, and we began to try and find a different way of doing things.
I mean, the other thing about party conference, it's the one sort of time of year when the whole circus show moves to a different part of the country. But everyone stays inside this kind of ring of steel with corridors disappearing into nowhere. And what year was this that we covered this Tory? But the Tories had just come to power.
Opposition. It must have been 2009.
No, they just come to power promising to be the greenest government ever.
Oh, 2011. 2010, 2011,
yeah. Saying they were, remember Hugger Husky and all of that. And we did, one of our films was going to be about this, so we started filming what was actually going on at conference, and we wanted to attend what was the Green Fringe event, showing off the Tories' green credentials.
And again.
This is what happened.
We're saying it. Where's 7B?
7B's downstairs.
Okay. Let's keep this. It's like Spinal Tap. We're trying to find some Tory Greens, and they've sent us down a fire escape.
It's Monday lunchtime on the Tory conference fringe. We're trying to find our way to a meeting put on by something called the Tory Green Initiative.
Is this it? It's behind 5. 7B's behind 5. Come on.
The coalition took power promising to be the greenest government ever. But since the summer, it's all gone a bit quiet on the climate change front.
Getting dark in here.
Still, today at conference has been designated Green Growth Day.
Here we are. Cancelled. Well, this is what happened to the Tory Green Initiative.
A few principles came out of this sort of encounter that we kept having, which is to show the reality, not some kind of construction of what this event should look like. To move around and not sort of stand outside with your lights and tripod and camera, lose all of that stuff, and film all the bits in between what the rest of the TV sort of media normally do. Show the journey, and the journey is the story, and this was a sort of very vivid example of that. And so this was how our sort of work in partnership sort of began, us having a laugh around these kind of places. The next step in covering party conference, you guessed it, is to get outside of the bubble. So we started going out, say the conference was in Blackpool, we'd go out and speak to the good folk of Blackpool and bring their opinions back to confront politicians with. Anything to add to that?
No. Give us an example. I don't remember doing it in Blackpool.
The journey's the story a little bit here as well. We're sort of slightly making up as we go along. But
here we go. This is it. This is when the Tory conference came to Manchester, and it must have been, what, 2013, 2014? 2014.
Yeah.
George Osborne was about to make one of his big speeches, so you get a flavour of that, and then what happens when you say, look, fuck that, folks, and you go somewhere else?
We are the party of hard-working people. And to anyone who questions that, I say go to the workplaces of Britain. Take your arguments to Bury or Morecambe.
The Chancellor told the Conservative Party conference that the long-term jobless will be required to do community work in return for their benefits.
Yeah, we were talking about today that everyone was getting money off the government, benefits and stuff, and then they're trying to introduce a new system.
I think we spend too much money on the benefits system.
Yeah, we do spend a lot.
What I think is wrong is the fact that we work so hard to get where we've come, but then yet half of our wage gets taxed. The people that are not really bothered.
I know whose side this party is on.
What do they mean?
Yeah. People that work for a living.
Right.
Should be getting free money for more than a year. Or not even a year.
You shouldn't get free money. Someone else has got to work for it, you can fuck off and make it yourself.
Why should people from other countries come to our country and be able to claim our benefits?
We shouldn't have council houses. Do you know what I mean? Everybody should be in the right to buy scheme. Everyone should be in some type of education, helping to buy the property even if it's just to pay for their own funeral at the end of it.
Positive word.
There you go. Now, make something very clear. We are Guardian journalists, okay? So in the course of those encounters, clearly we are dying inwardly. These are very difficult, chewy encounters for us, but we rapidly came to the conclusion that this should sort of partly be our mission. To remind not only a few of the people we work with, but also the wider audience, more importantly, that the world is a very complicated place and that people do not necessarily share liberal left opinions and that liberal left politics and commentary somehow has to navigate its way through that. And we've really stuck to that ever since. If there was an Anywhere But Westminster t-shirt, and there probably should be, its slogan would be, it's fucking complicated.
I mean, the other thing to say about this is it was a bit of a bucket of cold water over ourselves, because we sort of had got used to going out of the bubble and finding opinions that contradicted those politicians. And we came out of Bury thinking, oh my God, everyone, people agree with this stuff. And so it was the first time, we learned that a very important part of the process is to question our own assumptions about what, not only our methods, but what people thought and what people were saying. And I forgot what the second thing is, so I'll just move on.
What it tells you. So,
this is the bullet point, yeah.
These are the kind of rules of Anywhere But Westminster. So get out of the ring of steel, whether metaphorically or literally, get out of the bubble. Talk to more members of the public, preferably in places that rarely see the media. We always sort of know when we're in Anywhere But Westminster land because there aren't TV cameras everywhere. We recently covered the by-election in Stoke and it was kind of painful doing that because you're compromised and sort of hemmed in by the fact that the media's all over town. We don't really like that. As we just said, challenge your own preconceptions and those of your audience. We'll probably come into this in what Isabel has to say later, but there's a tendency in the modern media because of bubbles and the fact that these great communities of like-minded people are created, that people don't like being challenged. We think that's part of what journalism ought to be about, clearly. And then, very importantly, each film is a voyage of discovery. More and more as we've made these films, we come to the conclusion that you should be honest. So if things aren't happening, if we go to a town like Ipswich where nobody will talk to us, then we'll say it. We're not there to make a film, a piece of work that fits some preordained agenda. Very often, the process of making the film almost defines the film itself.
Around about this time of this thing, we've been picking up the rise of what we all sort of now recognise as sort of Brexit-related sentiments. And at that time, it was manifested in UKIP's sort of rise. But UKIP was still being written off as kind of a loony EU fringe issue sort of party that was mainly a threat to the Conservative Party and the right of the Conservative Party.
So we went to Jaywick, which is the poorest council ward in England, near Clacton in Essex. It's an example of it. This is the scenic places we tend to go, you can see. We've even been to the Outer Hebrides, where no one would talk to us at all. They made the people of Ipswich look loquacious, which is saying something. But anyway, this is what happened in Jaywick. This kind of encounter explains why, in a place like Jaywick, we find UKIP's seemingly unlikely appeal to working class voters work in such wonders.
Look at it all. Yeah, we're a backwater, aren't we? That nobody gives a shit about.
And do you think he and Mr Farage are any different?
Well, I'm hoping so.
Who did you used to vote for in the past?
Labour.
Did you?
Yeah, I always voted Labour.
He's doing it for the working man, though, isn't he?
Is he? What if he's just using it to get on the telly and give David Cameron a fright?
No, he's doing it for the working man this time.
Time was Labour was the party of the working man, eh?
Of course it was. Of course it was.
What happened?
Eh? Bloody Thatcher got in, fucking destroyed it, didn't she? Done the working classes, didn't she?
The UKIP's full of people who think Mrs Thatcher was the bee's knees.
Oh, they are. Oh,
they are, they're all Thatcherite. Nigel Farage says he's the keeper of the Thatcherite flame, and he thinks he's a Thatcherite. This fella wants to shrink the state. He's no fan of the trade unions and the working man.
Well, I don't suppose he is. Nobody is, are they?
But someone with your politics shouldn't be voting for him.
Yeah, of course they should.
It's most of my life, really, day to day.
On a political level, this was the first... No one had really been talking about the threat that UKIP posed to Labour and to former Labour voters, and this idea of a growing anger and disconnect and sense of neglect by not only mainstream politics, but as we keep saying, the mainstream media as well. The other thing to point out here is the way in which we engage with the members of the public. Again, think back to that sort of traditional media news at 10 style package. If they ever do go to sort of canvass the opinions of the public, I know because I used to work in TV news, you know, they say, right, go and get 3 for and 3 against. You run around the high street and you get a quick sort of balance of opinions and you come back and you cut it. It's a bit of a sausage factory. We sort of speak to people in a slightly different way here, right? Engage them, listen to them. Some of the conversations go on for about 15 minutes.
Yeah. And we don't start the conversation by saying who you're going to vote for. You know, we don't wear suits. In fact, in tribute to the ones who advertised in that film features a Carhartt jacket and denim blue Clark's original desert boots. We say, what's it like living here? How do you feel about the future?
Other brands are available.
Questions like that. And that tends to lead to much more productive conversations than going up to someone wearing a suit, with a camera the size of a house, throwing them against the wall and saying, hello, who are you going to vote for? That doesn't tend to work in our experience.
What are you going to say about Scotland?
Skip Scotland.
Should we skip Scotland?
Yeah.
Same sort of story.
That's a bit of Scotland. That's what it looks like. Now, this film, we managed to convince The Guardian that by this point, the kind of politics which we're seeing break out all over the world was really in full effect. To do, really, with something very striking, which applies to politics, the media, capitalism in general, I mean, in terms of business, brands, that mass mistrust, really, of messages handed down to people from on high and anything that feels distant and representative of the establishment. And we figured this was going on all over the place, so we convinced The Guardian to send us to the state of Indiana for the Republican primary, which was the Republican primary in which Donald Trump became the presumptive nominee. We went to the state capital, Indianapolis, where there was a great cause célèbre, an air conditioner factory that was moving its operations to Mexico, thanks to the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which Donald Trump was dead against. Donald Trump had made great political capital out of it, so we did that story. But we also went to the American version of a Barrett estate, somewhere where people were doing okay. Traditionally, you'd probably have felt you got a sense of the American dream. If you remember in E.T., that the house the family in E.T. lives on, it's like the Indianapolis equivalent of that. The sort of place 30 years ago would have station wagons parked outside. Not a poor part of Indianapolis by any means, and this is what we found.
Yeah, I mean, two important things to add to that is it's not just the poorest places that feel sort of slightly neglected or abandoned by me. You know, people never go to places like this, or at least hadn't at that point sort of gone to speak to voters about sort of Donald Trump in places like this. Second thing is, up until this point, most of the sort of commentary about the US election had been sort of about how Trump was, you know, this evil sort of / comedy character. And by association, anyone thinking of voting for him was also sort of tarred with all of the same stuff.
The gentleman that lives here, he works for Carrier. He's been there for 15 years. The people who live over towards the blue house across from the van, she's been there 16 years.
There's an obvious sign of things not being as they should be. All this lawn's overgrown. No one has lived in this house for quite some time.
We had a bad crash here a few years ago. A lot of the homes got foreclosed on. Factories closing, loss of jobs.
Is this going to affect how you feel about the election and how you vote in November?
I'm looking at it pretty strong right now, yeah. Okay. I want to keep the American jobs here and try to get a lot of our jobs back from overseas back over here.
And so who are you thinking about voting for come November?
I'm not saying right now.
If I say the word Trump, let me see what happens to your face.
Well, I like some of his views. Some of his views I don't like.
Right. How do you feel looking into the future of America right now?
It's there ain't much to say about it. Ain't what it used to be, that's for sure.
You're going to vote in November?
Oh, no.
You don't vote?
No. There's nobody worth voting for.
Donald Trump goes on and on about factories closing and making America great again.
He might actually be able to do something with something. Who knows?
I got to be honest, we sort of pulled into this neighbourhood, which is only 2 or 3 minutes from the Carrier factory, and I thought, oh, well, this isn't going to be the story. This is a sort of affluent, comfortable part of town. But it turns out that's not the case as far as that one. There you go. That's what happens really when you go somewhere where you don't necessarily think there's going to be a story. You find one. Also, what that illustrates is something that we found all over Indianapolis among Trump voters, is another great mistake bound up with that sort of top-down approach to political reporting. A great deal of political journalism always assumes that voters and the people they ostensibly support kind of amount to the same thing. So everyone who votes UKIP is like Nigel Farage, or thinks Nigel Farage is the bee's knees, and everyone who votes Trump thinks Trump's great in every conceivable way, right? And wears a red baseball cap with Make America Great Again, and it's kind of Trumpism incarnate. It doesn't work like that. As you saw there, lots of Trump voters, full of qualifications about him. Equally, I've met lots of UKIP voters who think Farage is an idiot, but still want to vote the way that they do. So again, it's very, very complicated. As people pull away from top-down politics, they're at a distance even from the political forces that they think are maverick and rebellious. It's very, very, very complicated indeed.
Which brings us to Brexit, I guess. This was part of, we did a series leading up to Brexit of about 8 films, covering various aspects of this new sort of, this angry sort of political mood. And by the time we got to the week before Brexit, we kind of knew what time of day it was and what was going on. And the reason being that all over the country, people were saying versions of the same thing, and it wasn't all of the things that stereotypes were saying about people thinking of voting Leave, right?
No, and but at the same time, what was very striking was that impression of a great national divide. So the day we were in Manchester, we were in Manchester for about a day and a half, and the day we arrived, we went to a graduate recruitment fair organised by Manchester University, at which we spoke to 19 or 20 people. There was one Leave voter who was a kind of Breitbart type, you know, sort of young, besooted alt-right merchant. Everyone else we met was a Remain voter. And most of them either didn't really know about people who were voting Leave or had very, very malign opinions of people who were voting Leave. So we asked one of these graduate students, what would he say to someone voting Leave? And he said, well, I would say, it's the 21st century, get with it. That's what he said. I bet he's laughing now. We then went to Collyhurst, where I'd been before. I'd done some reporting there. Collyhurst is a very poor neighbourhood in North Manchester, but it's only about 20 minutes walk from the centre of town. And the transition between central Manchester, which as you probably all know, if you've been there, it feels like quite an affluent, successful, cutting-edge sort of place. The contrast between that and Collyhurst is huge, and so it proved politically.
There's something I want to say before this as well, which is, you know, around about this time, you know, polls are saying X, Y, and Z, Leave is ahead or Remain's ahead. And what we're doing is speaking to ordinary people on the street, and you may be thinking, and some people sometimes are saying on Twitter, oh, what are you guys doing? You just speak to ordinary people, is that it? And we're kind of like, well, yeah. This is, to use sort of social science terms, right, this is, the polling is the quantitative analysis, right, and what we're doing here is the qualitative analysis. Now, we're not saying this on its own is enough, but certainly the sort of polling thing on its own tells you nothing. What this kind of thing tells you, and this kind of encounter you're about to see, is when you see what someone says, and you see where they are, and you see how they say it,
yeah,
you think, oh shit, there must be a lot of other people thinking like this.
Collyhurst is coming up again. It's a really nice place to live, but we do need more money spent on it.
Right. Have they sort of talked about, have people in power talked about spending money here?
They've had the gardens done, but that's it. Nothing else. There's nothing for the kids to do.
Garden done, that's it.
Nothing for the kids to play on. There's nothing at all. And yet it's a lovely place to live. My mum had her wait there, God rest her soul.
In
you
the
know
pub?
what I mean? In the Villa Greens, yeah. It's just, look.
It needs sprucing up.
It does need sprucing up, liveling up. You know what I mean? You don't see anything anymore.
Yeah, booming, thriving Manchester's only 10 minutes drive down there.
Yeah.
Why does that happen?
Money talks.
Last question. How are you voting in this referendum?
Out.
They're all voting in town.
Of course they will. They've got that.
It's down to a very simple thing for you. Those who have money vote which way?
To stay in.
And those who don't have money?
Vote out.
Fucking makeup, what are you going on at?
Stop laughing. It's not funny. No, it is funny. There you go. I mean, the speed at which they came back, you know, when we said to them, how you're out straight away. And the other thing we should say is, there's a sort of righteous quality about people there and what happened in Brexit, the fact there was a sense of reckoning. Because you have to think about the sort of place Collyhurst is, that it is 20 minutes from the centre of Manchester. There is one cash point in Collyhurst. There's 7,000 people live there. It charges £1.85 for a withdrawal, right? You have to get a bus to the nearest supermarket. There's no kids' playground. What you saw there was a rusted goalpost. That's all there is. By and large, for the last 25 or 30 years, despite some improvement, no one has really listened to the people of Collyhurst. And that ballot paper was put in front of them. It's a very safe Labour seat. And they did what they did. And everybody we worked with was very, very struck by that piece of film. I wrote a comment piece on the morning the referendum result was announced, when I cried, as contractually obliged Guardian journalist had to, you know. But once I dried my tears, I got round to writing. The first thing in that piece said, if you've got money, you vote in. If you haven't got money, you vote out. And that became our sort of watchword for the aftermath of the referendum.
And I'd say, you know, months of analysis after sort of Brexit happened have been sort of gradually working their way round to the kind of conclusions that hit us square in the face just by going to places like that and encountering people and listening to them.
Okay.
The counter's sort of at 0 now. What should we do? Should we
We'll just go through the last few points. Take a minute.
Last one.
Let's leave Sleaford to be Sleaford. Right. What have we learned? Well, this is about journalism. As you've heard, it's complicated. Vox pops in the traditional sense can be powerful, but they have their limits, which is why, as John said earlier, although on the face of it what we do is Vox pops, very often more will go on. So, for example, the weekend before last, we were in Stoke-on-Trent reporting on the by-election. We found someone very interesting who was quite articulate about why they weren't voting. We had a reasonably long conversation with them. We then found some Labour canvassers and took them to meet him the following day, and we had another conversation that lasted 15 or 20 minutes, so you have to go beyond that.
But also, kind of what I mean by Vox pops have their limits is the sort of, it's easy, and we haven't got everything right always. We've sometimes read too much into these encounters that we have in the street. You have to sort of always question your methods and question how much can you read into what you're seeing here, which is the next point. And something which hasn't come massively through those clips, but if you go home and watch some of our wider films, we're honest with the audience about the journey that we're going on in the films. We're honest, we reveal parts of the production process. If we don't know what the hell we're doing, we actually say that, and we say that on camera. I often film John without even knowing it, sort of saying, what the F are we doing here, or whatever. Yeah. And we try and lay that process open for people, and audiences like that. They appreciate it. They like it when you own your mistakes and you sort of are open about it, and they like it when you reveal your sort of journey and your methods.
The other thing within all this it's worth mentioning, which again comes down to a lot of things that are bound up with things I've heard already here today, is in this great febrile, unpredictable world in which we live now, prediction is almost impossible, and people have arrived at this strange notion of political journalism sometimes, that it's all about calling elections, right? That somehow you have to predict things. Now, I'm not Coral or William Hill or any of those people. I don't know. When we went to America, we went to these, what they call watch parties, where they announced the results of the primaries at 10 o'clock. Before they even counted the votes, this is arguably why America is in such trouble. Before they even counted the votes, they announced the result on the networks, and they have these parties, right? And we met a lot of people who claimed to be political journalists. And they were sitting behind laptops, and we said, what are you doing? And they said, I'm finding out whether Politico had the correct prediction or whether it was Nate Silver. And I thought, well, that's not journalism, that's gambling is what that is. And they said to us, what have you been doing all day? And we said, talking to voters. And they looked at us like we were balmy. I think that says something really about where things have gone wrong and about what political journalism ought to be. Anyway, on the last point about video specifically, do you want to say this point? Because video, it seems, is very well suited to this style of or approach to political journalism.
There are still times when I have to say, yes, video, yes, The Guardian, yes, I know it's a newspaper, yes, I do video for them. Video is what has, I'm a video producer at The Guardian, and I've been there 10 years doing that. Video, I think, maybe I'm slightly biased towards it, has taken aspects of The Guardian's journalism, including its political coverage in the form of what we and others are doing, and pushed it into entirely new places. Why? Because video, you can't do video sitting in an ivory tower. You've got to go there and get the stuff, get the encounters. It's more difficult to hide with video stuff. If you've gone to places and just spoken to 2 or 3 people on each side and cut a kind of manufactured piece of garbage sort of political news up, people will find you out, especially in this day and age. People are savvy. It has made us go out and go the extra mile and do this stuff, and that's a really important part of sort of how The Guardian has grown and changed. We've got one more slide about what we've learned about.
So clearly, and this fits with what I said earlier about that idea of things being handed down from on high, people being content really to live under the command of these unchanging establishments and ways of doing things. That's finished. It seems to me that 17 years too late, we have left the 20th century completely. Settled two-party politics, centre-right, centre-left, in which politicians kind of pull the strings and everything happens. That is finished. That's the difference, really. 20 or 30 years ago, say around the time of the advent of New Labour, we were told we were relatively prosperous, and to the majority of people it felt like that. And, you know, what Peter Mandelson had said to Alistair Campbell that day kind of was where politics was at. Now it's changed. There's a huge ferment out there among people. You don't know where it's going to go next, and that certainly applies to politicians. You kind of know about this stuff, but they're faced really with the business of running after the people, trying to find out where they are and how to speak to it. Think about Theresa May. Theresa May is a very good example of this. One of the reasons she looks scared out of her wits half the time, I think, is because she knows that who knows where the public are going to be tomorrow, and you have to really be mindful of that. And I think that demands a change to politics, and it demands a change to journalism. This mood isn't going away. As far as we understand it, a great deal of it is rooted in technology, the fact that people, because of the way that they interact with the world, irreverence, skepticism and all of that stuff is absolutely ingrained now, so people aren't going to accept the status quo, and they'll carry on really existing within this restless mood. Polling, sorry to any opinion pollsters here, is a dismal science. Data without real encounters is almost worthless. There is no point crunching numbers and all the rest of it unless you've got a sense of what's actually going on. And then to come back to point one, and this is really proved by the fact that when we go and talk to people, they bristle sometimes when we say with the media, the national media. They think somehow that that's part of the same machine as the politicians that they think kind of stitch them up in some way. And they're right.
I think they're right.
And they're right. So you have to be very, very mindful of that. Change the way that you operate. Don't behave like the stereotypical media. That sounded pious about it. That's quite difficult because we are media types. John and I, like everybody else, are absolutely immersed in it, but you have to try hard to think your way out of it.
And you know, we talk about fake news a lot nowadays, and we'll talk about it later, but I think that we have to be honest and think that the groundwork for fake news in the sort of Macedonian teenagers sense has been laid by the inadequacies of the so-called real or mainstream news. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this sort of open territory there to be taken. And if you really want to, worry about where that's going, you look at when Donald Trump and on the other end of the spectrum, sort of Jeremy Corbyn and co, are openly able to talk about the media being the enemy of the people and all that, and they get a very receptive audience. And I think, we should be careful that what has come for politics doesn't also come for us, the media. This sort of tsunami of, we don't know where that's going to end up.
That's it, really. I hope that was of some use. It's a very crazy, unpredictable, sometimes dangerous world out there, but I think it's incumbent on us all, and journalists in particular, to understand it. Thank you for listening.